What's up everybody and welcome back to the channel. In this video for the First Descendant today, we are looking at Ultimate Luna, who happens to be the most recent Descendant that was added to the game in update 1.3.3 as of the recording of this video. The funny thing about this Descendant for me, and this is absolutely a me thing, I think there's a ton of people who thoroughly enjoy playing this Descendant, is that it ended up not being as fun as I thought it would be. Now, like a lot of people who read the patch notes and saw them show off this Ultimate Descendant, I thought it was a natural evolution of a kit and everything like that, and I really thought that I would thoroughly enjoy playing it since I enjoy playing base Luna a lot more than I thought I would. This happens to not be the case, unfortunately, and I want to be very, very clear that, again, as I said, this is very much a me thing and should not be in any way an indication of her power level or just how fucking wonky she is, because she is an absolute melt machine. So Ultimate Luna might be the insanest Descendant we've got yet in terms of like the damage that she's able to deliver in a short amount of time, making her exceptionally good at dealing with tough void intercept bosses. She absolutely demolishes the Stormy Daniels, the Storm Hanger. She absolutely destroys this boss and is a excellent Descendant to essentially take to put this boss on a very, very comfortable farm for you to get those mats and everything if you still want to buy some of the cosmetics and all that stuff, or you just basically want to kill this boss as fast as possible. That of course also means that she's able to kill pretty much every other void intercept boss with similar efficiency, and it's just kind of silly because she pretty much has like a fucking one button delete where you essentially just ramp up your nodes to the maximum, and then most bosses don't even survive that first rotation as you just essentially dump all of your musical knowledge onto the enemy's chest. Now, that being said, she's also a very good mobber, but this is, I think, perhaps the part where she started falling apart for me, because again, it didn't feel as good as I thought it would feel to mob with her, especially because I kept on comparing to her previous kit and using Noise Search, which in my opinion, I still kind of feel is the superior way to mob with her. Nonetheless, in this video, we are going to be looking at her bossing build first and foremost as a foundation for you to essentially work from, and then you can make some small changes for whichever void intercept boss you actually want to kill with her, because I think she's very much in a way future-proofed in terms of that she's going to be a decent platform to kill void intercept bosses for the next couple of void intercept bosses we're getting. And at the same time, I'll also show you the mobbing build using similarly her skill-based mods. Now, what I am not going to be looking at in this video is the second mod, which turns it into a gun Descendant. There's a lot of testing that I still need to do with that. That too ended up feeling fairly underwhelming to me to a degree. Again, I was very hyped for both of these Transcendent mods, so again, I don't know what it is with me. It could just be me. It could be some form of fatigue or something that I set in or so on. So I don't want to dissuade you guys from playing this Descendant at all. She's absolutely disgusting. And as you've seen from the footage running in the background, you're able to do some really, really silly shit with her. So let's go ahead and have a look at the build. Okay, so starting us off, first thing I want to mention, one very big key thing, and that is that I think that Ultimate Luna is a Descendant that has a lot of potential min-maxing that's available to her, depending on exactly which weapon you use, which trigger module you use, and all of that. And there's definitely certain ways in which you can absolutely juice more power out of her. And pretty much you can kind of like custom her to the boss that you're trying to fight or to the activity that you're trying to do. And there's some changes to a kit that you can make that will make her more efficient in that. And I wanted to create a build that was kind of like a foundation or a framework that you could start from, and then if you were interested in choosing to hit those really fast times or try to get yourself on the leaderboard, there is of course a lot of improvements that can be made here. It's also still within the first, I would say, couple of days. I spent some time over the weekend testing things, but it's always the case that when you have a new Descendant like this, that there's still some nuance and things that needs to be tested and can be found out and so on. So I already know there's like sub 10-second kills on Stormhanger with this. So, I mean, dude, that's fucking insane. So, the footage that I showed is nowhere near that speed. But like I said, there's definitely some optimization that can be done to get you closer to that. But I just wanted something that I could very, very comfortably do it with. And I could essentially put the account on farm and just reap in those rewards, which absolutely this does. So first things first, of course, we're using Battlefield Concert. What Battlefield Concert does is it essentially affects all of her abilities. It changes all of her abilities. They are non-attribute in tech. And so that's a very, very good thing for us, because it essentially means that we can essentially just, you know, sort of like get one reactor for all of her damage and so on. What is very interesting though, and usually I first do the build itself and then I talk about the weapons. But in this case, we might need to actually talk about weapons first. Now, the reason for this is that because she is non-attribute tech, you might be thinking, holy shit, I gotta use fucking Secret Garden for this shit, man, because, you know, she's tech. Secret Garden is a tech stat stick, so let's go. However, she is one of those descendants that essentially has a unique weapon, as they refer to. So once you activate her first ability, she actually uses this deck that she rides on to produce the damage. And so therefore, the things that you get from Secret Garden, in other words, the tech damage boost and everything like that, actually does not translate through to a kit. However, she works a lot more like Haley. And what I mean by that is that what you actually have to do is you have to choose a weapon that has a very, very high base damage. And that is because when you look at her ability here, you can see that the additional damage on her unique ability on this deck that you ride is based on your firearm damage multiplied by 30%. So your weapon choice matters here, because the thing is, you want to have a weapon with the highest base firearm damage, and then essentially you just want to stack as many modules on that give you more firearm damage. Super, super important. And again, if you're in any way familiar with Haley's kit or how to, you know, sort of like take her out, then that way of thinking will already lead you a lot in sort of like the right direction. So when we talk about the weapons with high base damage, would be something like ATAMs is something with high base damage, Piercing Light is something with high base damage, Exterminator is something with high base damage. I think even you could say to a degree something like, let me see, what else have we got here? Yeah, a Restored Relic is also, right? So kind of like, you could say almost like your heavy weapons. But the two most important things, not the most important thing, the two most important things that you need to bear in mind with whichever weapon you pick is you want to have as high as possible firearm damage. And then if you really want to juice out the best possible damage, right, you want to also match the element to whichever you're trying to do. So like, for instance, in the case of if you want to do as much as possible damage to Stormhanger, you want to have a weapon that deals toxic damage, because Stormhanger is weak to toxic. Similarly, like for example, if you want to fight a boss that is weak against fire, then you also need to use a weapon that is basically, you know, stronger against that. So the point being that, let's say, for example, you want to mob with her, and you want to do Void Erosion Purge, and level 10 Void Erosion Purge generally is very weak against chill weapons, then you need to also use a weapon that is good against chill. So long story short, basically the point is this. Let's say, for example, you want to build it to, like I said just now, do Void Erosion Purge. Then it's probably a good idea to get yourself Piercing Light, because Piercing Light by default is very good against chill. And so therefore you can then build your Piercing Light very similarly to the way that I'm going to show you to build ATAMs, to essentially deal as much as possible damage to chill, which is going to make her very good in Void Erosion Purge. Personally, I still like using Nell in Void Erosion Purge, but she is absolutely viable in doing that as well. However, in this particular case, the first build that we're going to look at here is her bossing build. And pretty much the only bossing that kind of like makes sense to do with her right now at this moment in time, because she makes it so easy, is doing Stormhanger. And Stormhanger being like sort of weak to toxic means that you can use an ATAMs, because ATAMs does not have a base element, and you can essentially build it into a perfect toxic kill stick. All right. So in this case, the other thing that also needs to be mentioned is the fact that your weapon cores, even though this weapon is cored, don't translate over. Again, this is how unique weapons work. However, what does translate over is your substats. Okay, so we can gear up our weapon to be able to deal as much as possible damage through our substats as well. So good substats to use here would be firearm attack, toxic attack, because again, we want that element, bonus firearm attack versus Colossus, because once again, that is something that we can gear towards. And then we want weak point damage. I'll explain a little bit more about weak point damage right now. And when we go into the actual mods of your ATAMs, then in this particular case, you can basically get away with just building damage and fire rate and your element. Okay, that's perfectly fine. You will have slower kills than what I would consider to be the meta for her. But that is a very, very good basic stat stick, okay? So you go with the normal rifling reinforcement and attack and reaction. You go with fire rate up because that actually does affect the speed at which her fucking lasers shoot out of her deck. And then you go with, again, the element that you're trying to hit, which in this case is toxic enhancement and poison priority. All right. Now that maximizes your attack damage, it maximizes your attack speed, and it gives you a big push onto your element of choice, which in this case is a weakness to Stormhanger. However, the other thing that, and then of course charge amplification. Sorry guys, one other thing, charge amplification, just another great ramp up faster firearm attack. It goes alongside the package of rifling reinforcement and action reaction. So these 5 mods, right? And you could do that without actually enhancing, the gun too much. So if you haven't poured a lot of like mods and stuff into ATAMs, that's an easy way for you to get a decent stat stick for it. However, you'll notice that there are some other mods in here as well. I have weak point sight, I have focus fire, I have fixed shot, and I have special sight. All 4 of these mods relate to weak point damage, and it's another reason why we put that into our substat. Because when you aim down sights on her deck, when you're riding on the deck, you can actually aim down sights like you would do it with any other weapon in the game, then you can actually deal weak point damage. And so in that case, you want to be stacking as much weak point damage as possible, because that is, even though you can, it's entirely possible to go without this, it's going to drastically increase your kill speed on Stormhanger or any other boss for that matter if you actually do hit the weak points. You're going to deal a significant bigger portion of damage, and it's going to increase your kill speeds, by a lot. So definitely something like that, especially, look, I hate fucking Stormhanger the boss because he wriggles like a fucking worm and it's impossible to land weak point hits on him most of the time, especially when you have a beer in your other hand. But that being said, if you are capable of doing it, you're going to see a lot of fucking value from that. So, and that's what these mods are all about. So all of these mods basically just juice up weak point damage. I do like fixed shot as well, though, because you do have recoil when you shoot on that deck, and this actually does help you a little bit with that. So again, with the fucking grandpa aim over here, I just want to make sure that I actually land my shots, especially because we're trying to hit weak points. So yeah, there's that. So then that's the weapon done and dusted. Okay, so now we can go back to the actual mods that we have to use on the build itself. Now, funnily enough, a couple of weeks back, I built just normal Noise Surge Luna, which is her damage dealing build Luna, right? For her AoE damage. And the build that we had for that, if you refer back to that video, is extremely similar to this build. And so there's not a lot to change if you've already built that for some reason. And we're going to build her crit because you have your notes which actually juice up your critical hit rate as well as your damage based on that, and you can essentially reap a lot of additional damage for that. So she is absolutely a descendant that you should consider building into crit. I think it's far superior to just building into raw power. That being said, though, if you do build it into crit, a lot of your mods are chosen for you already, which is the case for many descendants that build into crit skill power. So in this case, you will have your 2 blue mods, skill insight and skill concentration. You'll have your 2 purple mods, emergency measures and front lines. All 4 of these mods add to your critical hit rate as well as your critical hit damage. Then the next thing you want to do, because cooldown does not necessarily, and I explained this with the Noise Surge build as well, what you have to bear in mind is that the notes are instant, right? When you shoot and when you press the notes, and if you hit them correctly and you don't actually miss a note, the cooldown is instant for those. You can see they're on note success, cooldown 0.0. So pushing her cooldown up, all right, is not bad for us. Of course, if you do miss notes, that's icky, and that should be obviously avoided. But that does enable us to choose 2 purple mods, which increase our damage values by a lot, however also increasing our cooldown. These 2 mods are Maximize Power and Maximize Skill. You can see that Maximize Power gives us skill power modifier plus 96.1, but also increases our skill cooldown by 50%. And then Maximize Skill does the same thing for skill power and also for skill cooldown. You'll then notice that on note failure, instead of having to wait 10 seconds for that note to come off cooldown, you will now have to wait 19.5 seconds, which is why it's important for you to essentially not miss notes. Now, the next thing that also helps us a lot is you want your effect, right, of the notes itself, right? So there's a buff that comes from this called Fever Time. And during Fever Time, you don't have to match your notes. you can essentially just go ham. And that's basically what you're trying to do if you fight Stormhanger, is you want to just get to the maximum amount of notes, and then you want to activate your 3 songs, and you just want to dump as much damage into the boss as possible. And at that point in time, you don't have to worry about hitting notes. It's mostly just your damage dealing phase. Now, you want this phase to last as long as possible, so something like skill extension goes a long way for us here, because this gives us skill duration plus 36.5 and actually increases our duration that we spend in that damage dealing mode. Now, the next thing that also helps us is range. When it comes to your range, that means like you basically auto shoot, right? Or you kind of like, it shoots automatically at a target, which is in your, let's say like, I don't know what the degrees is, like 45-degree viewpoint or something like that. But in the footage that you see running right there, you can see it happen. Now, that also has a distance to how far you need to be from the enemy before these shots actually start hitting. Now, by default, this distance is not shit. But in the case of Stormhanger, or just in general, if you want to be a little bit further away from the boss, so you have a better chance of hitting the weak points, but also a better chance of potentially avoiding damage if the boss is trying to fucking smoke you, then you kind of want to increase this distance a little bit so that you are a little bit further out of the distance, the range of the damage, but also a little bit further so you can actually land your shots. So skill expansion here is going to be good for us, because this gives us skill effect range plus 92.3%, which is super, super sexy. That leaves us with 2 mods left. Now, I personally feel that these 2 mods are flex slots, one more than the other, okay? I think Dangerous Ambush is phenomenal on this build, because you will drop Stormhanger into a fucking immobilized state very, very easily with the amount of damage that you're putting onto the boss. And then when that does happen, there's a massive amount of additional skill power, 49.8%, that you get from this, which just means that you're going to be able to capitalize on a lot more damage. But it's because this build tends to be a little bit more glass cannon, and I do realize that people in the comments constantly mention this and say, dude, you only have 6,500 HP. How the fuck are you not dying all the time? I'm dying all the time, everything like that. So I recognize that as well. So you can absolutely sacrifice some damage here to increase your survivability. And if you choose to do that, the slot that I would advise you to do it in is non-attribute Syncytium, okay? Because non-attribute Syncytium gives you non-attribute skill power plus 10.2%, okay? So this is a perfect slot for you to essentially put something in to give yourself more survivability. And that can be something as simple as just adding a HP mod in there, or you can even go something like Spear and Shield, which means you sacrifice a little bit of the non-Syncytium or the Syncytium damage. So this non-attribute skill power plus 10.2%. With Spear and Shield, you still get skill power plus 8.1%, but you do get that almost 90% of defense as well. So this is absolutely a slot that you should experiment with. However, with the speed at which you kill, especially if we're talking normal Void and Sip bosses, don't even fucking bother. They die so fast. But in the case of Stormhanger, if you do find yourselves dying a lot, and remember, you have lives in that encounter as well. So even if the boss fucking smokes you, just come back and kill him with your second life. You'll be just fine. But if you do find yourself dying too often to this, or maybe actually dying all 3 times and not making it through, which is a fucking drag, you absolutely do want to actually kill the boss, then consider swapping this to a survivability mode. So this is it right over here. Now, in terms of your trigger module, absolutely, there are, I think, some experimentation options available to you here. Something like, I think, Gap in Time is possibly an option, because Gap in Time works with this over here, so works with noise search. We'll talk a bit more about that later, but I think just again from a baseline, if you just want to have a decent damage bump without having to do anything to earn it or anything like that, then Power Beyond is obviously always a good choice. Power Beyond has kind of like become the workhorse of this season so far, because it's just a flat, if you have a max rolled one, it's just a flat 15% increase to your skill power, and you don't have to do anything to earn it. It just fucking sits there and gets it for you. But this is the build right here. If you want to screenshot it or anything like that, please feel free. Then we have to absolutely also talk about, because we've already covered the weapon, we do have to talk about the reactor. Now, materialized mechanics is what you're looking for, because obviously non-attribute and tech is your damage profile, right? You want to obviously make sure that you're mounting a sniper rifle, because that's the weapon that you're going to have in your hand when you engage to go to your unique weapon, which is the deck that you ride around on. Best in slot here for you when you are bossing with this is going to be additional skill attack when attacking Colossus, and it's going to be skill critical hit damage because you have a very high critical hit rate, and so this just juices additional damage out of that. And of course the additional damage to Colossus is also going to go a long way. So this is absolutely, I think, the best in slot reactor for you if you are just going to be bossing with this Descendant. Next, your external components is a much easier conversation to have since this is a non-attribute Descendant. Absolutely, Enlightened Mage does a lot of the work for you. You want to be building this for max HP and defense, so those would be the mods that you want on all four. And then in terms of your substats, you want to be gearing up for the kind of substats that you need for a skill-based Descendant that uses MP. Okay, so you want MP recovery out of combat and max HP on your auxiliary power. You want max MP and MP recovery in combat on your sensor. You want defense and MP recovery modifier on your memory. And last but not least, on your processor, yeah, it's kind of like you can pretty much have anything on here. But max shield and shield recovery modifier is kind of like what I generally roll on this part. But your first three parts of the external components are the most important. Of course, the reason why we use Enlightened Mage is because its 2 set bonus is more skill power, but its 4 set bonus means that you can essentially get additional stacks of this truth. And when you have 3 stacks of truth, your non-attribute skill power is 84% increased. So super, super, super good. Before we look at our arc tuning board, of course, the pet that you should be using, the fallow, should absolutely be the husky, because the husky has auto MP recovery for you. That is the unique effect of this pet. So absolutely, that's the best one for you to have, because this is a Descendant that is very MP intensive. And just in general, from now on forward, any skill-based Descendant is going to benefit from having that fucking pet running around with you. And then looking at the arc tuning board for our bossing setup, it's a couple of changes that we make here. This thing looks fucking disgusting. But of course, the point is there's very valuable nodes that we want to be picking up here. So we shoot across here, we get ourselves this skill cost reduction. We also get ourselves the skill effect range. We get the damage here. We grab all of this. We get ourselves the attack to Colossus damage. And then we go up here and we get this max MP node, which is kind of like super, super handy. Then when we're going up here, we grab all of these skill duration nodes, which means that buff or that mode in which we're essentially shooting without having to worry about missing nodes is going to last longer. And then, of course, we grab every single skill critical hit rate and skill critical hit damage node that we can get our hands on. This is the setup then that allows us to sort of like grab as much as possible from each one of these substats that are super, super important to us. Then last but certainly not least, your inversion reinforcements here. There are some, I use the same version reinforcement board whether I am bossing or mobbing, and that is basically I use focus boost here for the skill cost reduction, again because if you do miss notes and if you do kind of like miss on your shots and everything like that, you are going to burn MP, and so giving yourself the ability to just pay a little bit less for that is absolutely a good idea. Then what you also want to do is you just want to give yourself a little bit of additional survivability. I do, however, want to say deploy resonance device is also useful here because, again, skill duration is actually kind of handy for us because it lets that last buff last longer, as I've mentioned. So any more additional skill duration that you can get without affecting your damage too much is obviously like a good idea. There's also, I suppose, a sweet spot there where you could potentially sacrifice a little bit of damage for more duration and actually be better off. It is what it is. But and I like selective neurostimulation here because of the MP boost that we can essentially get from that. And then shield particle reconfiguration is just an additional survivability one for us here. So I put this in just to kind of like make the glass cannon a little bit less glassy. That's kind of like what we're doing. Alrighty, then let's look at the mobbing side. And in this particular case, I'm using exactly the same mounted sniper as I used for the bossing bolt. Again, because you're dealing more than enough damage in, let's say, normal mobbing content to not have to worry. If you are looking to take her into Void Erosion Purge, then I would consider using Piercing Light rather and gearing it towards Chill, but then putting exactly the same mods that I put in the bossing version of the ATEMs for that. But in the case of the footage that you saw at the beginning of the video, I was using exactly the same ATEMs with exactly the same mods, everything like that, pretty much as we set it up for the bossing build. When it comes to the Descendant module here, again, we're still using Battlefield Concert, and you'll notice that in terms of, if I just do this, you'll notice that there's really only 2 modules that are different between my boss build and my concert build, or my mobbing build, right? And that is, you'll notice that pretty much I take Syncytium and Dangerous Ambush off, and I replaced it with Amplification Control and MP Collector. I use Amplification Control because now it means that I have an even further distance that I can hit enemies from with my lasers from my deck, and it means that you can hit enemies that spawn further away from me, which will just help you mob a lot faster as well. Also, at the same time, potentially you will miss a lot more notes and you will be a lot less MP efficient when you are mobbing with her. Let's just be honest, it just is the case. We're not all fucking like cyborgs that can hit every single note. And in this case, MP Collector, especially for when you have to kill 250, 300, 350 fucking mobs, absolutely helps you to just be more in the fight and actually don't lose all your MP, which would mean then that you lose your deck and you kind of like go back to just running around with your sniper rifle in your hands, and you have to get your MP back before you can transform and go again. So MP Collector is going to help you stay in the fight longer and actually just be able to just stay in your concert mode and laser mode as long as possible. But other than that, everything is exactly the same, and you're still building towards crit and everything like that. So mods, other than that, everything's exactly the same. But then coming to the arc tuning board, this is very similar to the board that I had for Noise Surge, but essentially you just pick up as much as possible skill power. You come around here, you get your skill cost reduction, you get your skill effect range, you get the yellow mod here, and you shoot all the way up here. You zip up here and you grab all that critical hit damage as well as critical hit rate before carving your way down the side here and grabbing yourself a mutant cell for non-attribute cohesion. This is a boost for your non-attribute damage, which is based on the defeating enemies. And since this is a mobbing build, you're going to be defeating enemies. And so therefore, you're going to be stacking this up and getting yourself some additional damage there as well. Last but not least, obviously, it goes without saying, use the same dog. In terms of your reactor, you want to be using materialized mechanics, non-attribute and tech. But since this is a mobbing build, we don't need damage to Colossus. So we still keep skill critical hit damage because, again, we crit a lot. So we want to capitalize on the damage profile from that. But then in that case, our second substat is tech skill power. I think you can get away with non-attribute skill power here, but in terms of your damage buckets and juicing the maximum amount of damage out, your best option here for maximum damage is tech skill power boost. So you want to be getting that. And again, like I said, failing that, you can get away with non-attribute, which will be slightly less damage. In terms of your external components, same thing. Obviously, make sure that you mount your sniper rifle. Don't fuck that up. External components, same thing as the bossing build. We want to go Enlightened Mage and just basically run that through. Last but not least, as I've mentioned, Inversion Reinforcements over here, same thing. I'm using the same version in reinforcement board as I do for the bossing content. And so therefore we have Focus Boost, we have Selective Neurostimulation, and we have Shield Particle Reconfiguration. Again, here, if you want to be a little bit less survivable, a little bit less tanky, you can take Deployed Resonance Device, which gives you more skill duration, which is a very, very valuable substat actually for her. Now, instead of just referring to that and just referring to the video, I do want to take a quick second and just show that Noise Surge build that I keep on talking about. Of course, there is a video dedicated to that on the channel if you want to look at an entire explanation of how it's built. But I do quickly just want to flash those things if you want to try that out instead. Of course, that build is fully viable with Ultimate Luna because Ultimate Luna is the ultimate version of Luna. So in that case, what you want to do is you want to put in Noise Surge, all right? This Transcendent mod changes all of your skills to non-attribute singular. So bear that in mind, you're going to need a different reactor. This is not non-attribute tech, it's non-attribute singular. But this then means that you essentially build it very similar to the setup that we had for the other mobbing side. So you can see here, there are very few changes. Pretty much the only thing we do here is instead of having skill extension, we use Spear and Shield for that additional survivability as well as the skill power increase. And instead of using MP Collector, we use non-attribute Syncytium for even more damage. So this is the difference between the two mobbing builds right here. And then we are also using Gap in Time instead of actually using Power Beyond, because Gap in Time works very well for any Descendant that you don't stack any cooldown reduction on. And since we're not stacking any cooldown reduction on this, it means that you're just going to push out a shitload of damage. Now, just quickly looking at our reactor here, again, as I mentioned, it's not non-attribute tech anymore. It's now non-attribute singular. And in this case, the 2 substats that I took is more about utility than it is about actual damage. So I take range and duration here. Again, 2 very important substats for us because they allow the singing buff where we essentially deal AoE damage to last longer, as well as they also give more range to your AoE pulses. And then, of course, we're using Enlightened Mage once again, obviously the same reason why we said it in the other places. In terms of which weapon you need to use here, in this case, I use this as the primary platform for me to level weapons. I do have it optimized to hand cannon so I can run around with Malevolent, but the weapon here really doesn't matter. You're just pushing out raw skill power damage. The weapon doesn't matter. Even if it's not mounted, you're still going to be dealing more than enough damage to pretty much kill everything. And just again, showing the arc tuning board, it's the same arc tuning board as the mobbing setup that I had for the concert mod. So same thing right there. And that's going to be it for the video. Let me know in the comments how you've set up your Ultimate Luna. Are you enjoying playing her more than I am and more than I've been complaining about? Like I said, it's always this case with a new Descendant that comes out is very, very popular. However, I will say that I haven't seen her a lot in the wild, so I don't know if people are playing her less or something like that. It's entirely possible. But let me know what your thoughts are on this Descendant. Are you playing her? Do you also agree with me that Noise Surge is still in a way superior in terms of her mobbing setup than just using Concert for that? And that yes, while it is a massive raw damage boost for her, the point is it feels a little bit cumbersome, and the AoEs from Noise Surge just kind of like works better and feels like it flows better, because that's definitely the case for me. Other than that, thank you very much for the support, guys. We recently hit 50k subs on the channel. I just want to say thank you very much. The support has been phenomenal and continues to be so. Tons more videos coming, so keep watching, stay tuned, and as always, fucking cheers.